have children. I'm curious, with the vast array of knowledge that you now have about potential and the fact that kids are these incredible sponges, right? They certainly experience discomfort. We know that. They are sponges. We absolutely know that. Sometimes they're filters. We try and teach them to be filters. And hopefully they are imperfectionists. Maybe there are kids that are just perfectionists by default, but I have to imagine that they aren't, because standards come about when we become aware of other people's performance, right? What sorts of messages do you recommend parents give their kids? And what sorts of messages are you actually implementing that perhaps are different than you were prior to researching and writing your book on potential?
Ooh, interesting. Well, the first thing I should say is Becky Kennedy, Dr. Becky, is my favorite source of insight on parenting, and she's changed the way I think about a lot of what I do with our kids. But my wife Allison her instincts about effective parenting are so sophisticated. I feel like every day I learn something from watching her communicate with our kids. And so I came in thinking, all right, I'm going to write this book about potential. I'm not going to do a parenting chapter because I want everything to be relevant to parents. And sure enough, there's a chapter that had nothing to do with parenting where I was like, oh, actually, I'm reading this research, and there was a moment where I did something well, and I didn't even mean to do it. And this is something that I think everyone probably underutilizes. I don't want to, actually, that's an overstatement. I think a lot of people don't appreciate the importance of this approach to parenting, and I am trying to do it more often. So, quick story, and then I'll back up into the principles. So, I was getting ready to give my first TED Talk a number of years ago. Extremely nervous. I'm a shy introvert. I was, for a long time, afraid of public speaking. I remember in college literally shaking to raise my hand, being that nervous. And now I'm supposed to get in the red circle. Not my idea of comfort zone. And I happened to mention to our oldest daughter that I was nervous. And I asked her for advice on what I should do. And she said, I think at the time, let's see, she must have been, she was 7 maybe? I think 7, maybe 6. Anyway, she said, look for a smiling face in the audience. So it was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, that's such a good idea. Why didn't I think of that? Like, oh, yes, I can do that. I know people who are going to be in the audience. So I asked a couple of friends to sit in the front rows. And I locked eyes with a couple of them, and my nerves went down a little bit. So a couple weeks later, Joanna's getting ready to be in a school play, and she's also shy and introverted, and she's nervous, and she asks us for advice. And instead of telling her what to do, I said, well, what did you suggest to me a few weeks ago? And she remembered, and she said, look for a smiling face. And it was one of the most moving moments of my life. Like, Allison and I got to the play, and she looked at us and she beamed. And I just I think what I learned from that experience was kids need to feel that they matter. And most of us think about mattering as showing kids that they're unconditionally loved and giving them the support they need. But we forget that part of feeling that you matter is feeling that you make a difference. So as a kid, feeling like you have something to contribute. As a parent, asking my daughter for advice, that boosted her confidence. And I think that this is, I've come to call this the coach effect. It's one of my favorite recent findings in psychology, that when you're struggling with something, your instinct is to go to somebody else for advice and say, I need guidance. The problem is that keeps you in a passive frame of mind. It makes you feel like you're dependent on others. What you're better off doing is finding somebody else with a similar challenge and giving them advice. And what that does is it shows you that you have something to give. It boosts your efficacy. The research on this by Lauren Eskris Winkler and colleagues is fascinating. So people who give advice instead of receiving it, randomly assigned, end up more motivated and more confident. And I think this is something every parent could do, right? Whatever challenge you think your kid is going to face, find a version of it that you're grappling with and seek their guidance on it. And when they run into that same challenge, they will have confidence that they can begin to figure it out on their own. And you can be a coach in that process as opposed to just telling them what to do, which they may feel like is not relevant, or they may resist because they don't want to be told what to do by a parent. So that is my favorite parenting lesson from Hidden Potential.
I love that. And I love your statement that, kids like adults want to matter. That being, we hear, make them feel important, but so often that's tied to performance metrics. And those performance metrics are the very things that are making them nervous or that are creating anxiety. I love it. Are you taking additional kids for adoption? Because I'm raising my hand.
I think there'd be a lot more developmental psychologists in the world if we chose our careers later.
Super interesting topic. And by the way, I'm very much looking forward to reading your book, Hidden Potential. Clearly, I have a lot to resolve around that issue because I still hear Miss Rolfe in middle school just telling me how much potential we have and that I wasn't accessing mine. Oh no, it's like a voice in the back of my head all the time. And even though I feel very happy with many aspects of my life, that there are a lot of things that I want to do that I haven't done, and I think it's through limited what do they call it? Limiting self-beliefs or things of that sort.
Self-limiting beliefs.
Self-limiting
yes.
beliefs. There you go. I can't even say the phrase.
I do think all your fans are like, yeah, that Andrew Huberman really hasn't really tapped his potential at all. He's squandering it all.
Well, keep in mind, I've lived in a fairly narrow trench of pursuit. At 19, I got into this, and I've been doing this, like researching and teaching and doing research, it's pretty much all I've done for almost heading to 30 years. So, and you too, you've been in this game for a long time, and it's where we like to play. But what I've learned from you today, in addition to many other things, is that realizing our potential has so much to do with reaching outside. We hear about our comfort zone, but it's also reaching into our deeper wishes and thoughts. And I keep coming back to this idea of the tag team podcast and the origins of that in your mind. It's like I never would have expected that, but it also reveals something that sounds kind of like intrinsic to you. Like maybe you like to see things play out the way you think they should be played out, as opposed to what's clearly a intractable battle of loggerheads these days.
Yes, that's a core value. I think I can't imagine an unsolvable problem.
Oh, I love that. Man, I want your brain. Listen, Adam, I want to thank you, first of all, for taking the time today to come talk to us. Certainly not just about your book, but we covered an enormous range of topics. I mean, you talked to us about procrastination, which is sort of the third rail of life for so many people, creativity, intrinsic, extrinsic motivation, and blind spots, authenticity, and so much more. But also I want to thank you for being such an active teacher on social media in the classroom. You still run a research program. You're doing TED Talks. You're writing multiple books. You're an absolute phenom in terms of the amount of information that you're putting out into the world. And I must say, I always, always, always learn from your posts, your podcasts, your books. Like, there are certain people in the world, they're exceedingly rare, but you're one of them, that when they open their mouth, people learn, and they learn valuable knowledge. And it's a incredible thing to be on the receiving end. And so I just want to say, on behalf of myself and everyone else, thank you ever so much for what you do, and please keep going.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to me, considering the source, because the sentiments are mutual. I think every time whether it's reading one of your posts or seeing one of your reels, my overwhelming thought is that is a master teacher, and if I had been lucky enough to take one of your classes, I might have gone more of the neuroscience direction.
Well,
and then failed. But
No.
It would have been interesting to learn more about at minimum. And I just have tremendous admiration for your commitment to making science interesting, clear, and useful to people.
Thank you. Well, I consider us on the same team in that regard, and I probably will tap you about a potential collaboration. It'd be so much fun.
Sounds like a blast.
To work together. Meanwhile, again, thank you for everything you're doing, and like I said, just keep going, and please come back again. I feel like there are 1,000 other topics we could talk about, and that we should.
Honored. We'll try not to make you regret that.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me for today's discussion with Dr. Adam Grant. If you're learning from and or enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a terrific zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast on both Spotify and Apple. And on both Spotify and Apple, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. Please also check out the sponsors mentioned at the beginning and throughout today's episode. That's the best way to support this podcast. If you have questions for me or comments about the podcast, or guests or topics that you'd like me to consider for the Huberman Lab podcast, please put those in the comment section on YouTube. I do read all the comments. Not on today's episode, but on many previous episodes of the Huberman Lab podcast, we discuss supplements. While supplements aren't necessary for everybody, many people derive tremendous benefit from them for things like improving sleep, for hormone support, and for focus. To see the supplements discussed on the Huberman Lab podcast, you can go to Live Momentous, spelled O-U-S. So that's livemomentous.com/Huberman. If you're not already following me on social media, I am Huberman Lab on all social media platforms. So that's Instagram, X, Threads, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And on all those platforms, I discuss science and science-related tools, some of which overlaps with the content of the Huberman Lab podcast, but much of which is distinct from the content on the Huberman Lab podcast. Again, it's Huberman Lab on all social media platforms. If you haven't already subscribed to our monthly Neural Network newsletter, the Neural Network newsletter is a zero-cost monthly newsletter that includes podcast summaries as well as toolkits. The toolkits are brief PDFs that you can download that give you tools for things like neuroplasticity and learning, for managing dopamine, for enhancing sleep, for physical performance, flexibility, deliberate cold exposure, and on and on. To join the Neural Network newsletter, you simply go to hubermanlab.com, go to the menu tab, scroll down to newsletter, and enter your email. We do not share your email with anybody. Once again, thank you for joining me for today's discussion with Dr. Adam Grant. I hope you found the conversation to be as informative and practical as I did. And last, but certainly not least, thank you for your interest in science.
Personally have a sweet tooth, may I add. And, oh my God, this is so delicious, it's fatty. Or umami, recognizing amino acids. So that's the liking pathway, yeah? But in the wisdom of evolution, that's good, but doesn't quite do it. You want to make sure that these things get to the place where they're needed. And they're not needed in your tongue. They are needed in your intestines where they're going to be absorbed as the nutrients that will support life. And the brain wants to know this. And it wants to know it in a way that it can now form the association between that I just tasted is what got where it needs to be, and it makes me feel good. And so now, next time that I have to choose, what should I eat? That association now guides me to, that's the one I want. I want that fruit, not that fruit. I want those leaves, not those leaves. Because these are the ones that activate the right circuits that ensure that the right nutrients got to the right place and told the brain, this is what I want and need. Are we on?
We're on.
All right.
One thing that intrigues me and puzzles me
Yes.
is that this effect took a couple of days, at least in mice.
Yes.
And the the perception of taste
It's immediate.
is immediate. And yet this is a slow system. And so in a beautiful way, but in a kind of mysterious way, the brain is able to couple the taste of a sweet drink with the experience of nutrient extraction in the gut under a context where the mouse and the human is presumably ingesting other things, smelling other mice, smelling other people. That's incredible.
Yeah, but you have to think of it not as humans. Remember, we inherited the circuits of our ancestors. And they, through evolutionary, from their ancestors. And we haven't had that many, years to have fundamentally changed in many of these hardwired circuits. So forget us humans. Let's look at animals in the wild, okay? Which is easier now to comprehend the logic. Why should this take a long time of continual reinforcement, given that I can taste it in a second? You want to make sure that this source of sugar, for example, in the wild, is the best, is the richest, is the one where I get the most energy for the least amount of extraction, the least amount of work. I want to identify rich sources of sugar. And if the system simply responds immediately to the first sugar that gets to your gut, you're going to form the association with those sources of food which are not the ones that you should be eating from.
Don't fall in love with the first person you encounter.
Oh my goodness, exactly. Okay? And so evolutionarily, by having the taste system giving you the immediate recognition, but then by forcing this gut-brain axis to reinforce it only when sustained, repeated exposure has informed the brain, this is the one you don't want to form the association before. And so, when we remove it from the context of, we just go to, the supermarket. We're not hunting there in the wild where I need to form. And so what's happening is that highly processed foods are hijacking, co-opting these circuits in a way that it would have never happened in nature. And then we not only find these things appetitive and palatable, but in addition, we are continuously reinforcing, the wanting in a way that, oh my God, this is so great. What do I feel like eating? Let me have more of this.
You've just forever changed the way that I think about supermarkets and restaurants. They're understanding this fast signaling and this slower signaling and the utility of having both makes me realize that supermarkets and restaurants are about the most unnatural thing for our system ever. Almost the equivalent of living in small villages with very few suitable mates versus online dating, for instance.
Look, I'm not going to make a judgment call there because they do serve an important purpose.
I like restaurants too.
Yeah, but and so do supermarkets, thank God. I think they're not the culprits. Yeah, I think the culprits, of course, our reliance on foods that are not necessarily healthy. Now, going back to the supermarket, don't fall in love with the first, the need to work. You take a tangerine and you take an extract of tangerine that you used to cook that spike, let's say, with sugar. And you equalize them both where they both provide the same amount of calories. If you eat them both, they're going to have a very different effect in your gut-brain axis and your system. Once you make the extract and you process it and you add it processed sugar, to use it now to cook, to add, to make it really sweet tangerine thing. Now, you're providing now a fully ready to use, broken down source of sugar. In the tangerine, that sugar is mixed in the complexity of a whole set of other chemical components. Fiber, long chains of sugar molecules that need a huge amount of work by your stomach, your gut system, to break it down. So you're using a huge amount of energy to extract energy. And the balance, it's very different than when I take this processed, highly extracted tangerine. By the way, I use tangerines because I had a tangerine just before I came here.
Delicious. They are delicious.
And so this goes back to the issue of supermarkets. And so to some degree, given a choice, you don't want to eat highly processed foods because everything has already been broken down for you. And so your system has no work. And so you are co-opting, hijacking these circuits in a way that they're being activated at a time scale that normally wouldn't happen.
Well, this is why I often feel that, and I think a lot of data are now starting to support the idea that while indeed the laws of thermodynamics apply, calories ingested versus calories burned is a very real thing, right? That the appetite for certain foods and the wanting and the liking are phenomena of the nervous system, brain and gut, as you've beautifully described, and that changes over time depending on how we are receiving these nutrients.
Absolutely. Look, we have a lot of work to do. I'm talking as a society. I'm not talking about you and I.
We also have a lot of work to do.
Now, I think understanding these circuits is giving us important insights and how ultimately, hopefully, we can improve human health and make a meaningful difference. Now, it's very easy to try to, connect the dots, A to B, B to C, C to D. And I think there's a lot more complexity to it. But I do think that the lessons that are emerging out of understanding how these circuits operate can ultimately inform how we deal with our diets in a way that we avoid what we're facing now, as a society. Yeah? I mean, it's nuts that the overnutrition happens to be such a prevalent problem.
Yeah. And I also think the training of people who are thinking about metabolic science and metabolic disease is largely divorced from the training of the neuroscientists, and vice versa. No one field is to blame. Yeah. But I fully agree that the brain is the key or the nervous system, to be more accurate, is one of the key overlooked features.
It's the arbiter. Ultimately, it's the arbiter of many of these pathways.
As a final question, and one which is simply to entertain my curiosity and the curiosity of the listeners, what is your absolute favorite food?
Oh my goodness.
Taste, I should say.
Yes.
Taste, to distinguish between taste and the nutritive value or lack thereof.
Yes. Look, we, unlike every other animal species, eat for the enjoyment of it. It doesn't happen in the wild. Most animals eat when they need to eat. Doesn't mean they don't enjoy it, but it's a completely different story. Yeah? I have too many favorite foods because I enjoy the sensory experience. Yeah? Rather than the food itself, to me, it's the whole thing. It's from the present. Look, there have been these experiments done in psychophysics. Yeah? I'm going to take a salad made out of 11 components, and I'm going to mix them all up in a potpourri of greens and other things here. And in the other one, I'm going to present it in a beautiful arrangement. And I'm going to put them behind a glass cabinet, and I'm going to sell them. And I'm going to sell one for $2 and one for $8. Precisely the same ingredients, exactly the same amount of each. Ultimately, you're going to mix them. They're all going to be the same. And people will pay the $8 because, you know what? It evokes a different person. It gives you the feel that, oh my goodness, I'm going to enjoy that salad. So going back to what is my favorite food. To me, eating is really a sensory journey. I don't mean the everyday, let me have some, chicken wings because I'm hungry. But every piece, I think, has an important evoking sensory role. And so, in terms of categories of food, I grew up in Chile. Yes, so meat is always been, but I eat it so seldom now.
Is that right?
Yeah, because, I know that's not necessarily the healthiest thing. Red meat I'm talking about, yeah? And so I grew up eating it every day. I'm talking 7 days a week. Chile and Argentina, that's the mainstay of our diet. Now maybe I have red meat, once every 4 weeks.
And you enjoy it.
Oh, I love it. Part of it is because I haven't had it in 4 weeks. But, I love sushi, but I love the art of sushi. The whole thing, the way it's presented, it changes the way you taste it. I love ethnic food in particular.
You're in the right place.
You got it. That was the main reason I wanted to come to New York. No, I'm just kidding.
There's also that Columbia University
I came here because I wanted to be with, people that are thinking about the brain the same way that I like to think, which, can we solve this big problem, this big question?
And certainly you're making amazing strides in that direction. And I love your answer because it really brings together the many features of the circuitries and the phenomena we've been talking about today, which is that while it begins with sensation and perception, ultimately it's the context, and that context is highly individual to person, place, and time, and many, many other things. On behalf of myself, and certainly on behalf of all the listeners, I want to thank you, first of all, for the incredible work that you've been doing now for decades in vision, in taste, and in this bigger issue of how we perceive and experience life. It's truly pioneering and incredible work. And I feel quite lucky to have been on the sidelines seeing this over the years and hearing the talks and reading the countless beautiful papers, but also for your time today to come down here and talk to us about what drives you and the discoveries you've made. Thank you ever so much.
It was great fun. Thank you for having me.
We'll do it again.
We shall.
Thank you for joining me today for my discussion about perception, and in particular, the perception of taste with Dr. Charles Zuker. If you're learning from and or enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a terrific zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and Apple. And on Spotify and Apple, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. If you have feedback for us in terms of comments related to topics we've covered, or questions, or topics or guests that you'd like us to cover on future episodes of the Huberman Lab podcast, please put those in the comments section on YouTube. We do read all the comments. On today's episode of the Huberman Lab podcast, we didn't talk about supplements, but on many previous episodes of the Huberman Lab podcast, we talk about supplements that are useful for sleep, for focus, for hormone support, and other aspects of mental health, physical health, and performance. If you're interested in some of those supplements, you can go to livemomentous.com/Huberman to see the catalog of supplements that we've helped them formulate and that map directly onto specific protocols described on the Huberman Lab podcast. Again, that's livemomentous.com/Huberman. If you're not already following us on social media, we are Huberman Lab on Twitter and Huberman Lab on Instagram. And at both Twitter and Instagram, I cover science and science-related tools, some of which overlap with the content of the Huberman Lab podcast, but much of which is distinct from the information contained in the Huberman Lab podcast. We also have a newsletter in which we spell out protocols and some summaries from previous podcast episodes. If you'd like to check those out, you can go to hubermanlab.com, go to the menu, and you'll find the Neural Network newsletter. You can sign up for that newsletter simply by providing an email. It's completely zero cost. We have a very strict privacy policy. We do not share your email with anybody. Again, that's hubermanlab.com. Go to the menu and look for the Neural Network newsletter. And if you'd like examples of previous newsletters, you'll also find those at hubermanlab.com. Once again, thank you for joining me today in my discussion with Dr. Charles Zuker about the biology of perception and the biology of the perception of taste in particular. I hope you found that discussion to be as enriching as I did. And last but certainly not least, thank you for your